Hi, friends. Host Eric here, host of Talking with Famous People, and today I'd like to read a comment by a person named Patrick, a comment which Winston's mom sent to me via email, indicating I might like to read it. And I'm very glad she did send it to me. I did want to read it. In fact, I want to read it out loud here and comment on a bit upon it. Let me stop here and use myself as an example, Patrick says. Logic is not my passion, though it interests me. My passion is creative expression and artistic media, and the relationship between those media and the socio-political landscape. I have yet to definitively type myself, but INFP is very likely. If I do an interview with Rational Typology, and I'm talking about Federico Fellini. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Patrick doesn't have much respect for me now. I'm talking about Federico Fellini's Juliet of the Springs or Ingmar Bergman's Winter Light, and you have no knowledge of those films or their cultural impacts. Oops. I'm going to look down on you, and I'm going to be very irritated because it will feel like I'm talking with children. If I started talking about the Velvet Underground, and this gentleman on the left mistakenly thinks I'm talking about the mediocre band Velvet Revolver, I'm going to call out the lack of knowledge. I mean, I would hope so. If somebody thinks you're talking about Velvet Revolver when you're talking about Velvet Underground, there's a big problem there. It's a matter of pride. If you haven't done the homework, why are you interviewing me? I think, and if in fact I'm the kind of person you want to be viewing, why did you name your, if I'm not the kind of person you want to be interviewing, why did you name your channel old noir films from the 40s and 50s or whenever those movies were made, and cool bands of the 60s and 70s? It's like, why did you name your channel that if you don't know anything about those things, right? Would be another point to make here that's not explicitly made but is sort of carried through. I think that's why Eric reacted that way. He felt insulted that you brought a knife to a gunfight. It's not that I felt insulted. I felt like, oh, it's one of those things. It's just idiots posturing, you know. And thinking that's the same thing as saying things. Logic isn't just a TI personality trait, it's a way of living for him. Well, that's true. I mean, and that's necessarily the case for everybody's operational value. Sadly, Logic isn't the draw that content channels about comics or movies or music are. He has to fight to stand apart. This guy's a cult classic, not a bestseller. I really appreciate you saying that last sentence there. That's great. And unfortunately, I somehow doubt I'll ever be a bestseller. But the quality is there. For every bad video or walked back statement he's made, Eric's made 10 videos with content that is smart, funny, and provocative, and yes, intellectual. You guys want to clip his wings and treat him like he should be aping Megan Lavoda. Come on, this guy's a rare breed and he's going to run wild. That's why those who love his channel are all in on it. Again, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It's nice to hear. I think your channel has real potential and you've gotten some great guests, but this beefing shit is low-hanging fruit. It's easy to skewer the most controversial typology YouTuber in existence, and Eric is surely that. It's much harder to make an effort to understand him. So, of course, when I read this thing, I immediately took exception to the notion that it would be easy to skewer me. What do you mean it's easy to skewer me? Well, I mean, in some sense, it's easy to skewer anybody. If you choose to isolate out of context different little sub clips of a second long or whatever, you can make it sound like a person's, contradicting himself and or whatever. And the thing is, of course, I do walk back from statements. If I overclaim, I'm going to retract or walk back from that, and that's appropriate. It's the appropriate response to overclaiming. So it does happen sometimes. But I do my best to make sure that the stuff I end up talking about is well parsed ahead of time. It's much harder to make an effort to understand where is the INFJ empathy and maturity on this channel? Nowhere to be seen. You could have focused on how his FE tertiary and FI polar play into his personality. Instead, I see a guy who looks like a Game of Thrones extra lobbing insults, using mostly out of context clips. Amateur hour. Can Eric be arrogant? Yes. Hell yeah, actually, is what this person says. You bet. Can he be unpleasant? You bet. I've gritted my teeth at his brutal honesty often, but that's his charm. As Quentin Tarantino once said, you don't go to a Metallica concert and ask the fuckers to turn it down. Sorry to say, but that's exactly what these videos are telling Eric to do. Good luck with your channel. Patrick. I very much appreciate people standing up for me in some sense. And maybe one of the biggest reasons I very much appreciate it is I don't ever expect it. Like, being the type I am, and not just my type, but being Eric means defaulting to, of course, I have to win all of my battles myself. You know, it's like, of course I have to win the arguments myself. Of course nobody else is going to help me. Not can, but is going to help me. Nobody else is going to help me understand better why they're wrong. This does, but of course the person's probably right about self-identify as an INFP because they are my supervisor type, so it would be understandable that I would glean insight from what they have to say, you know? This stuff here, can Eric be arrogant? Yeah. Can he be unpleasant? I mean, the thing is, so many people have called me arrogant. And I guess there's no other word for it. But to be honest, I don't feel like I'm arrogant. I feel like I'm pushed into making true statements that I'd rather present in a more socially aware way because people aren't accepting or hearing a given set of justifications that's more appropriate. So, you know, it's like, let's say I am talking to somebody about fallacies or something, and like, you know, those people at RT tried to accuse me of certain fallacies, ad hominem fallacy or whatever, and so I pointed out, well, no, insulting somebody's not an ad hominem fallacy, and that to straw man somebody else, you have to actually present some minimized version of their position. It's essentially what this other channel, RT, is doing to me, is straw manning me, right? Trying to present me as somebody who's not internally consistent, not consistent in their words by cherry picking a line here and a line there and putting them next to each other and misrepresenting what was going on and not including the full nuanced argument, etc. That's straw manning. So they accuse me of straw manning them. Of course, I was just asking questions to try to figure out what their case was. The idea that I could have straw manned them follows after I understand what their position is, at least, you know. And there's another fallacy that they accused me of as well. I don't remember what it was, but regardless. So it's situations like that when I'm explaining to somebody, no, that's not how this works. And then I still am getting pushback, even though I'm completely correct about the matter. At that point, I say, okay, look, since you're not hearing my words, you're not able to parse independently of me, let me give you heuristic reasons why you might afford me legitimacy instead so that you can start to listen. I am somebody who's taught logic. I'm somebody who's been a long-time debate coach. I'm extremely knowledgeable about rhetoric and fallacies and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm no super genius. This is the other thing. When people say I'm arrogant, obviously what they're getting is they're talking about my relationship to other people when I'm communicating things. But the reality is, I understand the limits of my capacity very clearly. I am no genius. Geniuses are people who understand extremely complex math stuff that I can't. It's too hard for me. You know? Geniuses are people who do quantum mechanics stuff or things like that. It's stuff that's beyond me. And it's beyond me because it's simply too hard for me because I'm just not that smart. But what I am is extremely precise in my thinking. So I may not be able to apply this precision to things that are extraordinarily complicated, but if something's within the range of my capacity of scope of like the amount of complicatedness I can handle, then my precision will be as perfect as I can make it. I'm a big believer in using language precisely. And I'm a big believer in the idea that using language precisely can provide us substantially informative things about the world, ourselves, other people, etc. I've said before, and I'll say again, that cognitive functions comprises humanity's single metaframe that it's always needed, which explains why. Because for all of human history, people have battled their respective frames against each other. They projected their frame as the default normative good onto the world and punished that which deviated far from it, rewarded that which adhered to it, and so forth. And there's never been any means of articulating why it is that we have all these competing frames in a way that doesn't advocate one over the other. Cognitive functions affords us now clarity regarding why it is that these people are so staunchly against each other, for example, or why they can't seem to communicate. What's going on here, in other words. So it's like cognitive functions allows us to understand what's going on here in terms of this INFP who's commenting, in terms of me, in terms of the people at RT. The people at RT are individuals who are not valuing TI and not valuing NI very much. It would seem to me that if you were to just sort of describe what they're doing, it's using NI as an instrumental value to accomplish basically FE outcomes. I don't know what types those people are, but I can tell you that they might validate on some manner of FI scale in the sense that it would seem as though they're intent on dismantling clarity, certainty, singular answers about cognitive functions. And that might be considered validating with FI if their motivation is on the grounds that you can't put me in a box kind of a thing, you know. But I think mostly their behavior is about how individual human beings will, if they're expressing toxically, will express in their cognitive functions such that they manifest in a toxic way, whatever those functions are. So I guess the point here is cognitive functions in the metaframe affords us the clarity that says RT, that problem is not function linked, really. That problem, regardless of their relationship with the values associated with various functions, that this is something going on with them, right? Like, I mean, the simplest explanation, although it's a little self-aggrandizing, I suppose, is that I think that chick wants to get on me. Basically, it feels a lot like a boy pulling the pigtails of the girl in front of him in kindergarten class because he likes her. Except I'm married, very happily married, and and even if I weren't, that's not a good way to get my attention. So before the thing is this, I have a reasonable expectation to be taken seriously as a human being, which means that if you're going to call your channel Rational Typology and come talk to me, then like Patrick says here, it's like if you don't know anything about typology, if you haven't done any homework here, why did you name your channel Rational Typology and interview me? If you can't answer any basic questions about it, if you don't even know whether it's false, your notions about it are falsifiable or not, what makes you call it rational? There's no falsifiability. How do you distinguish between rationality and non-rationality? It's like really, really basic level questions here. So, when you call yourself rational typology, you're saying to the world, we know something about typology. If then the only thing you want to do is attack me personally for things unrelated to typology or the things I say about typology, because you don't like my attitude, or you don't like my arrogance, or you don't like my certainty, or whatever else, then obviously I'm not going to be very interested in affording you much attention. So the thing is, on my last little video, in which I was like, will you fuckers get off my jock, Rational Typology left a comment indicating, see, another terrible, shitty argument you leave, Eric, here. Something like that. Well, I mean, yeah, that wasn't much of an argument. It was me saying, I don't want to watch your shitty stuff because it's going to make me mad. But it's such a disingenuous comment to leave, right? Because it's like, I've made shit tons of long explanations that have been entirely ignored. So this is basically somebody who's attempting to tease me into reacting. And I'm not going to discuss this matter any further beyond this video here. The bottom line is this. Cruelty and suffering make me sad, most of all. Illogic makes me frustrated. Inability to communicate effectively with somebody else will cause me to become very frustrated, But what makes me mad more than anything else is people treating claim making as though it didn't matter. People leaving trash all over the place, intellectually, verbally, about stuff for which there are clear words to be said. We have a lot of clarity about cognitive functions. I just typed an ISTJ, and I hope he lets me publish, because it was an excellent typing session and demonstrative of all the things I'm repeatedly saying. I don't get a lot of chance to type ISTJs, and this individual, I spent about an hour and 20 minutes with him, and by the end of it, I was thinking, okay, he's ISTJ. Now, how am I going to break the news to him? He probably thinks he's INFJ. And so I was like, okay, so here's the thing. And he said, well, before you tell me, let me tell you what I've got it narrowed down to. And he had already had it narrowed down to ISFP, INFP, and ISTJ. And I said, oh, well, that's easy. I'm so happy to hear this. You're definitely not an INFP because you don't have that kind of robust extroverted intuition, but it's not polar. And you don't have, since it's not polar, you're not an ISFP. And so what I was going back and forth between with INFJ and ISTJ, I rather definitively determined after enough questioning that he was SI over and not NI. But some of his early answers were consistent with NI, so I wanted to double and triple check because I was assuming he was going to have a problem with my typing of him because most people don't go into typing sessions wanting to be ISTJs, thinking they are or whatever. Interestingly, he performed quite poorly on the rat test, which is about what you'd expect for NI, all in the 8th slot, although I've seen ISFJs perform really well on it. And so it may have more to do with a combination of where NI and FE are than it does have to do exclusively with NI. But regardless, it's like, what I'm saying there is pointing out the fact that we've got all these means of testing people. And the means of testing people continually get tested themselves. So by using the rat test on the SI Dom today, I highlighted a distinction between this one SI Dom's results on a rat test and the other kind of SI Dom's results on a rat test. Is that indicative of something that we can consistently use to distinguish between ISFJs and ISTJs? Well, I don't know. I'd have to test that a bunch too, right? And if I have enough ISFJs and ISTJs to test, then I will continue to check that. But that's the sort of genuine work. That example I just gave you right there, there are hundreds of examples like that of testing questions that are continually getting validated and invalidated or adjusted to be more valid and so forth. They've gone on for years through many, many typing sessions. In other words, there's a lot of real work on an SI level for me that goes into being certain about things. And to pretend as though I weren't doing that work, that my certainty had no justification both in terms of conceptual identity, that is to say that what I was saying is logically consistent, but also in terms of actual empirical identity, which is to say I'm the only one who's meaningfully testing the tests. Nobody else is doing that. I'm the only one who's putting out all my typing sessions for everybody to view and critique and to agree or disagree with me. Nobody else is doing that. I'm presenting clear tests that you can use too and check against people to see if I'm right about these strong correlation between certain skills tests and certain locations in the slots, right? If you go around and ask a bunch of random people SI questions, recount what you did for the last couple of hours in a sequence of details, you too will discover there is a subset of the population that seems strangely unable to do that, as though that part of them were broken. SI polar, you know. These kind of things represent not just intellectual work, but intellectual work that's applied. And it takes both components to really be able to justify the amount of confidence I now have in my understanding of cognitive functions. Remember, I was not always this confident. For a long time, I refused to call it a model. I just called it a taxonomy because I didn't feel as though I had a clear enough understanding of its mechanics to call it a model. For a long time, I'd hedge when talking about the strength of the linkage between a given test and a given conclusion. Like I hedged here about the rat test. I'm not really sure how much that links to introverted intuition. So, but for many of the tests, I no longer have to hedge because I've done the work. For people who don't understand that communicative work, intellectual work, language-based stuff like this is just like building a house. That it relies on object permanence, that the arguments that I make stay in place until I adjust them, in which case they stay in that new way, right? So this is a long process, hard fought indeed. I don't think I'm fighting to stand apart. I genuinely don't think that's that's my purpose. Although this person may not admit it's my purpose, they may have meant that I have to fight all the time because I stand apart. In some sense, if I want people to take me seriously, I am the one making extraordinary claims, more extraordinary than the rest of the people. We're talking about typology anyway, which is to say, other people aren't claiming to be exclusively right about it, whereas I am, to the extent that others disagree with me. That's where then the exclusivity kicks in, right? So it's understandable that I should be expected to provide an extraordinary amount of justification to uphold that claim, but I do and have and will continue to. The problem is when people come in and view some chunk of what I'm doing, they naturally are going to sort of intuit the rest of the iceberg. If they see something, if the first thing they ever see of Eric is a failed humor piece, they're just going to think I'm a bad comedian. If the first thing they see of mine is a very dense TI explanation piece, they're going to think I'm a boring YouTuber, etc. And I'm getting pulled in different directions at all times. So I had a comment on, I made a video yesterday, I think it was, about intuition and what is intuition really. Peter Dentici left a comment saying basically, if you don't explain it more fully than this, Eric, in this video, then you're gonna mislead people into drawing some wrong conclusions here. Well, and then somebody else replied to that saying, I like this video a lot. My response to Peter was, remember there are two vectors here. The more thorough the explanation, the fewer the views. And it more or less works like that. So this video is pushing 30 minutes now, and it's just been talking about my relationship with other people's perspectives on my role as a typologist, my correctness as a typologist, my role as a YouTuber, my legitimacy as a YouTuber, or whatnot. So these RT people are attempting a strategy of sorts, which is that if all you do is talk about people who have more subs than you, and you jump around and you do some interviews and stuff, there's a good reasons to think that you could grow a lot as a YouTube channel. If Talking to Famous People did nothing but interview other YouTubers, I don't doubt that it would grow a lot more as a channel, especially if I could get ever larger YouTubers to agree to be interviewed by me, right? Of course, I'd have to have a specific shtick on how to interview them, what to interview them about, but that'd be easy enough to determine. And I have a good model here, right? You'd have a good model there. Just being an interviewer is a good model. You need to be a decent interviewer, but you'll get better at it over time. And you don't have to rely on yourself to generate ideas. However, if you want to be a critic, so to speak, which is like type police. When I'm doing type police, I'm saying, you're not a meh. If you want to be a critic like that, that's fine too. But you really picked the wrong guy to do that to. So it's like, whatever your approach is to critiquing things, people, YouTube channels, typology notions, you're barking up the wrong tree here. It's like, for somebody with if you're basically taking a provocation approach, you're going to fail utterly, because you'll have to do so much work to frame me, to successfully misframe me as something that I'm not. I've made over 6,000 videos. There's shit tons and piles and piles and piles and piles and piles and piles of evidence that anybody can go through and find an occasional clip here or there. But to do so, they have to willfully ignore the vast majority of everything I say. And of course, that's, you're not going to fool people too long when your reach is so much shorter than the thing you're aiming for. So enough with those people. I'm not going to respond to it. I'm not going to deal with them anymore. And but I did want to read this comment, and I I don't wish ill on the RT people. I hope they've learned something from this whole experience and figure out how to do their stick in ways that make them less look like complete idiots, you know? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to deep plane chase.